Hi everybody! The video today is going to be about converting a Shadow 2 single action double action trigger into a single action only trigger. CZ has been releasing Shadow 2s with single action only triggers, but if you got one of the double action single action, the traditional Shadow 2 or older models, and you want to convert to a single action only, this video is going to be for you. First, let's cover the tools that we're going to need: a gunsmith block, a gunsmith hammer, a Hemstat, or one of these tweezers that locks in the back here. It's not a required tool, but I strongly recommend, and you will understand why when we're dealing with the trigger return spring, so you don't have that flying across the room. A plastic punch, a small screwdriver, a flat screwdriver, a regular 1/16 punch. Is that 1/16? Yeah, 1/16 punch. Torx T20 size, and then 2 parts. You only need 2 parts for this conversion. Actually, you only need 1, as a matter of fact. You need the required part to make this conversion is really a single action trigger. The reason you do need a single action trigger is because of the geometry here. So these holes, the way they are positioned and how your trigger goes into the trigger bar, it will push on the single action only trigger. The holes are positioned in a way that when the trigger pin that goes in the top here and fix this system to the frame, when it's fixed to the frame, we'll push the trigger bar back enough until it's basically almost touching the sear. If you use the regular double action trigger or any other double action trigger in your conversion, you're not, the geometry of these holes, the position of these holes, it's not going to do that. It's not going to push the trigger bar back all the way. Otherwise, it wouldn't work in double action. And then what you're going to have is a trigger that has the reach and the travel of a double action trigger all the way to the front, and you have to pull it back all the way. You're going to have like a huge slack until you feel the sear and finally breaks and drops the hammer. And then your reset's going to be short. It will be a regular reset. It would reset where it would normally, but then you have all that slack again because the trigger will want to go all the way to the front. So basically, required part, you need a single action only trigger screw. Now this part, it's not really a requirement, but I strongly recommend you to do. It's a floating pin. It's a trigger shoe floating pin. The reason I'm recommending this is because this trigger pin here on the OEM Shadow 2, it's a stake pin. So once you take them out, you kind of let's say you shrink. It's kind of a mushroom end on each end, and this is what keeps this pin in place. When you take it out, it goes through the hole in the frame, and then that mushroom kind of shrinks to the original diameter of the pin, and then basically there's nothing there to hold this pin in place. So if you just take this pin out and reuse this pin, you are at risk of this pin just running out. You can use some, red Loctite and stuff like that, but this is a very cheap part, the floating pin, and it will work really well. The way it works is it has this kind of a slot in the middle, and your trigger return spring is going to be right there sitting in that slot, preventing it to move to each side. So that's why the floating pin is a good idea. Alright, let's go to change then. I am going to go fairly fast through disassembling the gun and taking the parts out. If you need more details on that, I put a video together on a couple videos actually, part 1 and part 2, on complete disassembly of the frame and the slide. In this case, we won't touch the slide, it's just some parts of the frame that we need to remove. So feel free to pause this video, go to that other one, check the details on how to take these parts that I'm going to do here now at your own pace. But I'm not going to do this very slow right now. So I'm going to get my Torx T20 here, and I'm going to take the grip panels off. The reason this is the first thing I'm going to do is because I want to take the mainspring off and release the tension that everything here in the ejector and the hammer, everything is under tension now because of this spring here, because of the mainspring. So I want to take this off, makes my life a lot easier to work in this area. To do that, I got to remove both panels. These are beautiful aluminum trigger panels. Too bad they don't work very well, particularly for competition. Like, you won't see people competing out there in practical shooting with shadow tools with their original steel original grips, but they do look good. That is undeniable. All right, once you got there, you're gonna use your 1/16 punch to remove this pin here in the top and take the mag brake out. There you go, mag brake jumps out right out. Put it aside. Now, spring cup here of the mainspring, press this with your thumb and then it will relieve the tension on the cup pin here. As soon as I press this cup's gonna fall down easily. So I'll put this. Forgot how heavy this original mainspring is. All right. Find a position where it will be easy to press. There we go. Pin comes out. Spring cup comes out. Mainspring comes out. Okay. No more tension here on top. Now we can go here and work real quick here. That's when you're gonna need your flat screw, small flat screw, flat screwdriver, and what you're gonna want to do here is raise the sear leg up. So the sear leg here, this is a very ingenious system here. The sear leg is what keeps the safety in place. There is a notch in the safety axe, and then the sear leg falls right to that notch. So you have to raise it and at the same time push the safety to the side. So I'm gonna raise it first here. Okay, it's out of the way. You can tell now that spring there, it's out of the way, not like it was before. So I got my plastic punch and I'm gonna push the safety from the right to the left. Safety comes off. Put my thumb here in the ejector, take the safety out. Ejector comes out, or sear cage, however you want to call it. Put it aside. Now, next thing you want to do is get a, oh, I forgot to include a tweezer in your list of tools. You need a tweezer or a nose plier, and you remove the safety detent on the left side. And then I like to remove the safety detent on the right side too, although it is necessary. It's just a precaution because this thing falls really easy out of the gun and it's a really small part. You take that out. Next thing, you can push your safety on the right side out too. Technically you don't need to remove it. I'm doing it again because these things are going to fall from the gun as we're manipulating it. So the next thing now this is when you will thank me for recommending you to use this. We're going to take the trigger bar out. For that, we need to take the trigger pin off, and that's when your trigger return spring may fly. So you're going to use this to lock it, just to keep it safe in place. All right, I'm going to get my gunsmith block here. As you can see, it's just a piece of 2x4 with some holes I made. These holes are strategically positioned in this piece of 2x4 so I can work in certain models of guns. So here's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to pinch. I'm going to go there and find where my trigger return spring is. Trigger return spring is this thing here we're talking about. Oops. Right. See that leg of the trigger return spring going forward? That's a good place to clip it. I'm going to use the hammer stud to clip it. Once it's clipped, I can put this on the side here on my block. Find where I have a good hole here for the pinch to slide through, the pin to slide through. Get my 1/16 punch. Actually, I have a longer punch that's better for this. There we go. And before that, this is an OEM one, has never been removed, so I'm going to use a starting punch. Another tool I forgot to put in the list, but it just makes your life easier. It's not required. And I'm gonna do the first, start moving it first with the start punch. Okay, it's already moving. Got my 1/16 punch again. Go there. That's it. Original trigger pin is out. I'm not gonna reuse this. This I'm gonna toss away. And I keep this in place, put my hand like this to hold it. I can pull this punch now safely, nothing's gonna fly, and my trigger return spring is right here. safe and complete with the tweezer. Good. All right, now we can remove the trigger bar with the trigger shoe. And this is where we're gonna work. We're gonna replace this trigger shoe here by the single action only. Reuse the trigger return spring. And that's all we need to do. There is another recommended step, which is to remove your disconnector, because this becomes a kind of a useless part. This part has only, it only plays a role, excuse me, in a double action operation of the trigger. If your trigger is a single action only, this part here becomes completely useless. So it's recommended to remove, because, you know, why would you have something there that, you know, can just cause you a problem if it's not even being used for anything? So, but at the same time, people are gonna ask, do I have to remove? What happens if I don't remove? It works if you don't remove, it's fine. It's just that I would not have the disconnector there if you're not, if your trigger is a single action only. Okay, we got the trigger bar. Now we're gonna remove the trigger from it, and it's this pin between the trigger and the trigger bar that keep them connected. When this system is in the gun, the frame is kind of makes a sandwich here on the trigger shoe, and it doesn't let the pin slide any to either side. So once it's out, the pin just comes off. It's a loose pin. There's nothing fixing it. So separate trigger shoe from trigger bar. Toss that double action, single action trigger to the side, and get my single action trigger placed in the same position here with the trigger bar. So use the same pin again. There we go. Now we're going to put the trigger return spring, and the best way that I know of doing this is using a slave pin. So you can put in the comments if you know a better way to do it, but the way that I know is to get if I can catch it. Okay, a slave pin is basically a pin that is going to go, should be approximately the same diameter as the trigger pin is going to go through here, and go through the trigger return spring as well. And then the important thing here is that there's no excess on either side. So as it goes through, nothing on the left, nothing on the right. As long as there's no excess here on each side, it will work as a slave pin. It could be like this is a steel pin, but you could use, even I've used like toothpicks or any, like even a piece of cotton swab. Just cut the wood here. This wood is actually the diameter goes through that. You can cut to length, and as long as, like I said, there's no excess on either side, it will work. Okay, so I got the trigger return spring here. It has a longer and a shorter leg. The longer leg is going to go outside the trigger shoe. The short leg goes inside in this kind of a pocket here. So it goes like this, longer outside, shorter inside, and then you're going to push it through with your fingers until the spring loops align with the holes that the trigger pin is supposed to go through. Once that is all aligned, all you have to do is use your slave pin. As soon as I can do this, see if this one's giving me trouble today here for some reason. There we go. Got everything aligned. Got my slave pin here. Put it there. It goes through everything. And then you have your trigger bar with the trigger return spring and trigger shoe, everything assembled. And all I have to do now is put this back into the gun. Once we have the whole system, trigger bar, trigger return spring, and trigger shoe connected, I'm going to then, with this slave pin, I'm going to then put it back in the gun. So back of the trigger bar goes first. The trigger finds a slot there, dives in. Sometimes you got something bumping here into place. There we go. Now the next thing we need to do is going to be really difficult to do on camera, but I'm going to try to do off camera and then show you once it is aligned. But basically you want to align that slave pin with the hole of the trigger pin right here. You want to align this hole with the trigger pin, so basically with your slave pin. So basically you look through the hole and you're supposed to see your slave pin perfectly centered with the hole. You have to be careful. It's not perfectly, if it's not perfectly centered and you try to, because what you're going to try to do is use a punch to punch it through and replace the slave pin and the whole thing with the punch. If it's not perfectly centered and somehow you displace the slave pin but the punch doesn't take its place, your trigger return spring it's gonna fly out, or at minimum you're gonna need to restart. You're gonna need to put the trigger turn spring in place again outside the gun, and then reset the process. So let me put this align here. One thing you need to make sure is that the longer leg of your trigger turn spring is actually within that notch in the frame. This is what was not right here and preventing me to do it. So now that it is in the notch, it's gonna let me, with my index finger here, the right hand push the trigger bar forward, and my left hand here is gonna hold the trigger, manipulate the trigger here until I find that perfectly centered position that I mentioned. Now, it looks good to me. I'm not sure, it's gonna be really hard to show on camera, so I'm just gonna go use the punch to go through. Why not get my, here we go. So you got your punch, 1/16 punch, and you will replace the slave pin. Slave pin fell down here. Now you got the system there. It's working. Now we need to replace this punch with the floating pin. So that's the next step. So to do that, to replace the slave pin, sorry, the punch with the floating pin, I'm gonna use my, I don't know if the camera's, oh yeah, the camera's gonna catch it. I'm gonna use my my gunsmith block, my 2x4 here, and there's a hole here that goes through that the punch is gonna go through like this. So I lay it down at the edge of the table here, at the edge of my bench, and then it stays like that. And now I can use something to just, I'm gonna get my my floating pin here, put a little bit of lubrication here, just a tiny bit, that's not too much here. Position it in the hole here, in the trigger pin hole. I'm going to use my hamstat to lock that trigger turn spring in place, so it doesn't, if anything goes wrong here, that I don't lose that spring. Once that is in, what I want to do here is push this pin, push the floating pin down until you feel it's actually pushing the pin. If it's not pushed, sometimes there's a little bit of hammer tap here, and just, if it's not pushing the pin, pushing the punch down, it's not yet centered. Yeah, there we go. Once it is, you just go with confidence and do one big punch. It's fine. There we go. Everything fell down, but the trigger is working, the trigger turn spring is in place, everything is okay. All right, now all I have to do is put everything back together. I am not going to remove the disconnector of this one right now, just to show you that actually it works with the disconnector in place. But this would be technically the last step. Take the hammer out and separate the disconnector from it. You don't need the disconnector anymore. But let's put everything together here. Where do I start? Well, the first thing I'm going to put back there is my safety plunge. Got my tweezer. Safety plunge goes back. Put it back in place. I'm going to use the flat screwdriver just to hold it in place while I compress it. This is something to be careful too. You don't want it to fly away, but it is there. Next step is going to be the right side safety. Put the right side safety there. Push the trigger bar down a little bit so it fits in place. Perfect. And then the next part is going to be the right side safety detent. Perfect. Then we're going to go with the ejector or sear cage, however you want to call it. Just make sure. One thing that can go wrong here is, like, sometimes the pin that holds this, that connects the ejector and the sear spring in place, sometimes it slides out because it's the same thing as the trigger pin. The trigger shoe pin. What prevents this pin to move is the fact that it is in the gun. It's like a sandwich. The frame is holding it, and there is no space, no room for this pin to walk in each direction. But once it's out, sometimes it can move, and if there is any excess, if the pin is a little bit more to the right or to the left, it's going to give you trouble to put the sear cage back in the gun. So once it's there, hold it with my thumb, get my safety goes through, stop into the sear spring, use the flat screwdriver to raise the spring just like we did when we removed it. We're going to do it again now to put it back in place. You just raise the sear spring enough so the safety slides underneath it. Once it slides underneath and is connected to both sides, now you just push that safety plunge, not plunge, sorry, I said plunge before, is a detent. Push that detent back, and your safety is gonna slide in. Now you just push that little sear spring leg back into that notch, and voila, it locks your safety. Your safety's not going anywhere again. Next step here in reverse order is the mainspring cup and mainspring cup pin. So we're gonna put the mainspring here. Make sure the hammer is down so you have the minimum tension in the spring. And I'm gonna use the original spring, which is a really heavy one, the OEM spring rather. This goes in the main hammer stud. The cup goes in here, and then the pin. If you feel strong enough, you can push with the thumb. I don't feel like that. For this original one, you can just push it down here. Let me find something harder than this foam thing here, this mat. So put something on there, push it down until it's aligned, and the pin should go through. Hold on, find an area here that you can actually push a little bit further down. There we go. The next would be the mag brake. The mag brake in. That was the first thing we removed after we took the grip panels off. So it's going to be the last thing we're going to put in before we put the grip panels off. Already here, much longer than that. Okay, got this aligned. Get your pin in. All right. That brake's flat. You can put the grip panels back. It's done. All that's left for us to do is to test it. So if I get my slide back, get my slide stop, and voila, we got a single action trigger. This does not work in double action, as you can see. It resets and breaks in single. That's it. Hope you enjoyed.